At the airport, my son's wife turned to me and said, "You don't need to come with us. Stay behind." She rolled her eyes, certain I would obey like I always had. Instead, I smiled and told her, "Check the first-class ticket." What happened after that left her speechless. Before I begin this story, please subscribe to the channel and comment where you're watching from. I love seeing how far these stories travel. My name is Eleanor Grant. I'm 70 years old, a widow, and I live a quiet life filled with small routines. My husband, Richard, passed away 8 years ago, and ever since, I've poured all my love into my son, Daniel, and my grandson, Jacob. Spending time with them is what keeps my days bright. But things changed when Daniel married Vanessa. From the very beginning, she made it clear she didn't see much value in me. She was always polite in public, but behind closed doors, I caught the sighs, the eye roll, and the little comments that reminded me I was unwanted. I let it slide because I didn't want to cause tension for Daniel, and I didn't want Jacob to ever feel caught between the people he loved. So when Daniel suggested we take a family trip abroad, my heart leaped. I imagined walking through new cities with Jacob, hearing his laughter, making memories that would last. I spent weeks preparing, packing carefully, and even saved money to buy small surprises for him. But in the back of my mind, there was always a fear. I knew Vanessa would find a way to remind me that she didn't think I belonged. I told myself it was just my imagination, that this trip would bring us closer. But as the day of departure came closer, I couldn't shake the unease. Something inside me whispered that the airport would not just be the start of a journey, but the start of a test. The airport was buzzing with the usual chaos of families shuffling through lines, travelers hurrying with rolling bags, and announcements echoing overhead. I clutched my small suitcase, keeping close behind Daniel, Vanessa, and little Jacob. For me, even the noise and crowds felt exciting, because I believed this was the beginning of something special. Jacob tugged at my hand. "Grandma, are you excited?" he asked, his brown eyes shining with curiosity. I smiled warmly. "Of course I am. We're about to see a new part of the world together. Isn't that wonderful?" He nodded eagerly, but before he could say more, Vanessa cut in. "Jacob, stay close to your father. Don't run off." Her tone was sharp, dismissive. She barely looked at me as she adjusted her designer handbag and pulled the passports from her purse. She always made sure to take charge, as if she were the only adult capable of responsibility. At the check-in counter, the airline clerk greeted us politely and asked, "Tickets and passports, please." Vanessa handed over 3 boarding passes with a practiced smile. I stepped forward, suitcase in hand, expecting her to pass mine along as well. But instead, Vanessa said clearly, "It's just the 3 of us." She gestured to herself, Daniel, and Jacob. The clerk looked confused. "I thought there were 4 passengers." My chest tightened. "What about me?" I asked softly, though my voice shook. Vanessa turned toward me with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Mother, you don't need to come with us. This trip will be too much for you. Airports are tiring, flights are long, and you'll only slow us down. It's for the best if you stay behind." Her words stung, sharp and public. The man behind the counter raised his eyebrows, clearly uncomfortable. Jacob's mouth fell open. "But Grandma has her suitcase. She was so excited," he protested, his young voice filled with confusion. Vanessa bent down and whispered, though not quietly enough, "Jacob, she'll be fine at home. We'll send her pictures, and she can hear all about it when we come back." She straightened again, rolling her eyes in my direction, as though I were a child insisting on tagging along. I felt the heat rising in my cheeks. Passengers waiting behind us glanced curiously, some with pity, others with judgment. My suitcase felt heavier in my hand, my dignity slipping with every second of silence. Daniel finally spoke up, his voice low. "Vanessa, maybe this isn't the place?" She snapped back quickly. "Daniel, please. You know it'll be easier without worrying about your mother's needs. We've talked about this." His shoulders sagged, torn between defending me and keeping peace with his wife. He avoided my eyes, and that hurt more than Vanessa's sharpness. I took a step back, heart pounding. For years I had let her belittle me in small ways. The sigh when I offered to cook, the sarcastic thanks when I brought gifts. the way she pretended not to hear me when I spoke. But this was different. This was her stripping away my place in front of strangers, my son, and worst of all, my grandson. Jacob tugged at Daniel's sleeve. Dad, Grandma has to come. She promised we'd sit together on the plane. His little voice cracked as he glanced at me with pleading eyes. I wanted to comfort him, to say it was all right, but the words wouldn't come. My throat felt tight, choked by humiliation. Vanessa sighed dramatically, tapping her foot as though I were wasting precious time. Mother, let's not make a scene. Be reasonable. You'll be more comfortable at home. Her words struck me like a final blow. Be reasonable, as if wanting to be part of my family's trip was unreasonable, as if my presence was nothing but a burden. For a brief moment, I considered stepping aside. It would have been easier to nod quietly, to let her win yet again. I had done it many times before to keep the peace. But as I looked down at Jacob's face, his innocence, his disappointment, his loyalty, I realized I could not surrender this time. Inside me, something shifted. Years of being quiet, of swallowing insults, of trying not to trouble anyone. Suddenly, it all rose to the surface. I wasn't just someone's mother-in-law. I was Eleanor Grant, wife to a man who had once cherished me, mother to a son who still needed me, and grandmother to a boy who adored me. I straightened my back, lifted my chin, and held Vanessa's gaze. She expected me to bow my head, to obey, to disappear quietly into the background. But this time, she was wrong. My hand slipped into my handbag, brushing against the envelope I had kept hidden. The ticket inside was more than paper. It was proof that I belonged, that I mattered, and that I had prepared for this very moment. With my heart pounding and my resolve firm, I smiled at Vanessa, a calm smile that unsettled her arrogance. Then I said clearly, "Check the first-class ticket." For a long moment, Vanessa just stared at me, as if she hadn't heard correctly. Her perfectly shaped eyebrows lifted in disbelief, and then she gave a short laugh. "What are you talking about? You didn't buy a ticket." She turned back to the clerk, clearly expecting him to confirm her words and back her authority. But I didn't move. My smile stayed calm, and with steady hands, I reached into my handbag and pulled out the envelope I had been saving for months. The white paper looked simple, but inside was the choice I had made long before this day. I had purchased my own first-class ticket with money I had carefully set aside over the years. I placed the envelope on the counter and slid it toward the clerk. "Please check this for me." The clerk, a young man with kind eyes, opened it and scanned the ticket. His face brightened. "Yes, Mrs. Grant, you're confirmed for this flight. First class, seat 2A. His tone was respectful, and he looked at me with a warmth that immediately softened the sting of Vanessa's dismissal. The people behind us leaned forward, curious now, watching as if this were a small play unfolding right in the middle of the airport. Vanessa's smile faltered. "First class? Are you joking?" she asked, her voice sharper now. The clerk shook his head politely. "No, ma'am. This ticket is fully valid. Mrs. Grant is traveling with you, but she has her own reservation." Jacob clapped his hands together, his face glowing with excitement. "Grandma, you're in first class? That's amazing." He tugged on Daniel's sleeve. "Did you know about this, Dad?" Daniel's mouth opened, then closed again. His eyes shifted between me, Vanessa, and the clerk. "No," he said finally, his voice low. "I didn't know." Vanessa turned on me then, her face tight with irritation. "How could you afford that? Why wouldn't you tell us?" I met her gaze evenly. "Because it wasn't your concern. I wanted this trip as much as you did, and I made sure I could come along without being a burden. I may not spend on handbags and jewelry, but I've learned to save for what truly matters." Her lips pressed together into a thin line. She glanced at the people behind us, at the clerk, at Jacob, who was still beaming with pride. She hated losing control, and it was clear this moment had slipped completely from her grasp. Daniel cleared his throat, his voice hesitant but carrying more weight than before. "Vanessa, Mom's coming with us. She has her own ticket. Let's not make this harder than it already is." Vanessa shot him a glare, but he didn't back down this time. For the first time in years, My son wasn't avoiding conflict. He was standing on the edge of seeing me clearly. The clerk printed out my boarding pass and handed it to me with a smile. "Enjoy your flight, Mrs. Grant. First-class boarding will begin shortly." I tucked it into my bag carefully, feeling the paper like a badge of dignity. My heart was steady now. The humiliation Vanessa had tried to cause had flipped into something else. Strength, pride, and a quiet victory. Vanessa leaned toward me, lowering her voice so only I could hear. "You planned this, didn't you?" I held her gaze and replied softly, "I planned to value myself. That's all." Her cheeks flushed pink, and she turned away, pulling Jacob closer to her, as if to distract from her embarrassment. But Jacob wriggled out of her grip and ran back to me. He grabbed my hand. "Grandma, can I come sit with you in first class, please?" I laughed gently, brushing his hair back. "Maybe for a little while, sweetheart. We'll see what the stewardess says." The clerk chuckled and said kindly, "I'm sure they'll allow a visit. First class always has a little extra room for family moments." Daniel gave me a look then, one filled with something I hadn't seen from him in a long time. Respect. He nodded once, and though he didn't say the words, I felt them. "I'm proud of you, Mom." As we moved away from the counter, I walked with my head held high, suitcase rolling easily behind me. Vanessa trailed just a step behind, silent now, her authority shaken. She had expected me to disappear into the background, obedient and small. Instead, I had shown her, and everyone else, that I was more than the frail woman she dismissed. I wasn't just tagging along. I belonged here, and for the first time in a long while, I felt it. When the boarding announcement echoed through the airport speakers, a ripple of anticipation passed through the line of passengers. Families gathered their belongings, couples adjusted their tickets, and children clutched stuffed animals as though the plane might lift off without them. For me, however, the moment felt entirely different. My heart wasn't racing with nervousness. It was steady with determination. This was the moment I had been waiting for, the moment when dignity would replace humiliation. "First-class passengers may now board," the clerk called out cheerfully. I tightened my grip on my boarding pass and turned to Daniel, Vanessa, and Jacob. Vanessa's lips pressed together, thin and pale, her cheeks burning with irritation she could no longer hide. Daniel stood awkwardly between us, his hands in his pockets, looking as though he wanted to say something, but couldn't quite form the words. And Jacob, dear Jacob, was practically bouncing in excitement, his eyes shining with pride. "Grandma, it's your turn," he whispered loudly, tugging at my hand. I smiled at him and nodded. "Yes, it is." I stepped forward toward the gate, each stride a quiet declaration that I was not invisible, not disposable, and not an afterthought. The gate attendant scanned my ticket and greeted me warmly. "Welcome aboard, Mrs. Grant. Seat 2A is waiting for you." She gestured toward the tunnel, her smile genuine. For a woman who had spent years enduring Vanessa's subtle insults and dismissive remarks, that moment of respect, simple, professional, but sincere, felt like a gift. As I walked down the jet bridge, I didn't look back. I didn't need to. I knew what Vanessa's expression would be. Anger mixed with disbelief, wrapped in the shock of losing control. She had expected me to step aside, humiliated and quiet, like I had so many times before. But this time, I had chosen to stand tall. Inside the aircraft, the difference was immediate. The wide leather seats gleamed, soft lights glowed warmly, and a friendly flight attendant took my bag and placed it in the overhead compartment for me. "Can I get you some water or juice before takeoff?" she asked kindly. "Water will be fine, thank you," I replied, settling into my seat. The cushion embraced me, and for the first time in years I felt not just comfortable, but worthy of the space I occupied. From where I sat, I could still see the passengers filtering in. Daniel entered first, with Jacob beside him. Jacob craned his neck, searching for me. When his eyes found me, he waved so enthusiastically that people around him smiled at the sight. I waved back, my heart swelling. Then I saw Daniel glance at me, and in his expression, I read something new, something I had longed to see. Respect. maybe even admiration. Vanessa followed, her heels clicking sharply against the aisle floor. She avoided looking in my direction, guiding Jacob toward their economy seats. But the stiffness in her shoulders betrayed her frustration. She had lost this battle, and she knew it. As the rest of the passengers filed in, Jacob tugged on Daniel's sleeve and whispered something. A moment later, Daniel approached a flight attendant and spoke quietly. She smiled and nodded, then walked Jacob up the aisle toward me. "Grandma, they said I can sit with you for a little while before takeoff," Jacob exclaimed, climbing into the wide seat beside me. His delight was so pure, it made my eyes sting with tears. He ran his fingers over the buttons on the armrest, wide-eyed at the space and comfort. "This is amazing. You're amazing." I kissed the top of his head. "I'm glad you're here with me, sweetheart. Do you know why this seat is special? Because it's first class?" He guessed. "Yes," I said gently, "but also because it's a reminder. It reminds me that I deserve to be here, just like anyone else. And one day, I want you to remember that too. Never let anyone tell you that you don't belong." His small arms wrapped around me, and in that embrace, the humiliation of the airport vanished. All that remained was pride. Pride in myself, pride in Samuel's memory, and pride in showing my grandson that strength doesn't always mean raising your voice. Sometimes strength is quiet, calm, and unstoppable. As Jacob returned to his seat with Daniel, I caught one last glimpse of Vanessa. She was staring straight ahead, her jaw tight, her hands gripping the armrest. For the first time since I had known her, she had nothing to say. No snide remarks, no dismissive comments, no forced smile. Silence was her only weapon now, and even that felt hollow. When the plane lifted off, I leaned back against the seat, closed my eyes, and let the moment wash over me. I hadn't just boarded a flight. I had claimed my place, not just on this plane, but in my family's life. I was no longer the woman who quietly endured, who allowed others to define her worth. I had reminded everyone, including myself, that I mattered. And in that quiet victory, I felt freer than I had in years. The steady hum of the plane filled the cabin as I sat back in my first-class seat, watching the clouds stretch endlessly outside the window. The sting of Vanessa's words at the check-in counter still lingered somewhere in the back of my heart, but it was softened now by the memory of Jacob's smile and Daniel's glance of respect. For once, I wasn't shrinking into the background. I wasn't pretending to be invisible to keep the peace. I had chosen to value myself, and the choice had changed everything. When the flight attendant came by with a tray of refreshments, she smiled warmly and said, "Mrs. Grant, can I get you anything else?" It was a small gesture, yet it reminded me of something Vanessa had tried to strip away for years. The simple dignity of being treated as if I mattered. A few rows behind me, I could hear Jacob's excited voice carrying over the chatter of other passengers. "Grandma's seat is huge. Did you see the buttons? And the snacks?" His joy was so innocent, so unfiltered, that I knew he would remember this moment, not for Vanessa's attempt to exclude me, but for the pride of seeing his grandmother stand tall. That, more than anything, felt like victory. Mid-flight, Daniel made his way up the aisle. He hesitated beside me for a moment before leaning down. "Mom," he said quietly, "I'm sorry I didn't speak up sooner. You deserved better than that." I touched his hand gently. "Daniel, sometimes silence hurts more than words, but I see you now, and that's enough." His eyes softened, and for the first time in years, I felt a bridge being rebuilt between us, a bridge that Vanessa's dismissiveness had nearly burned down. Later, when we landed, the atmosphere had shifted. Vanessa kept her voice clipped, her eyes focused on her phone, but she didn't speak to me with the same superiority she once carried. She avoided confrontation, and though I knew her pride was wounded, I also knew something had shifted inside her. She had been forced to see me not as an inconvenience, but as someone capable of making her own choices and standing her ground. As we collected our luggage, Jacob ran to my side. "Grandma, I want to sit with you again on the flight back. You're the best part of this trip." His words made my heart swell. In the end, that was the real gift, knowing that no matter how Vanessa treated me, Jacob would always remember his grandmother as strong, kind, and present. That night, as I lay in the hotel bed, I thought about Richard. I imagined him smiling, proud that I had finally defended my dignity without bitterness, without shouting, just with quiet strength. It struck me that aging does not mean surrendering your place in the world. Too often, people assume that older women should step aside, fade into the background, or be grateful for scraps of respect. But dignity doesn't vanish with age. It only grows stronger if you protect it. Vanessa's words, "Stay behind," were meant to belittle me, but they became the spark I needed to rise. And the truth is, I didn't do it just for myself. I did it for Jacob, who will remember this lesson when he grows older. I did it for Daniel, who finally saw that his mother was not weak. And I did it for every older woman who has ever been told her value has expired. The aftermath of that trip was subtle, but lasting. Vanessa stopped making little digs in front of Jacob, and Daniel made a point of calling me more often, asking for my advice the way he once did, before marriage had clouded his judgment. I didn't need Vanessa's approval anymore. I had reclaimed my place, and that was enough. The greatest lesson I carried home was simple. You cannot wait for others to recognize your worth. Sometimes you must hold your head high and remind them that you are not invisible, not irrelevant, and not a burden. You are still here, still valuable, and still deserving of respect. That day at the airport, Vanessa thought she could humiliate me. Instead, she gave me the chance to prove something not just to her, but to myself, that I would never again let someone else decide if I belonged. And so, I tell you, if someone ever tries to push you aside, remember that your worth doesn't depend on their permission. You carry it within you, and it shines brightest when you refuse to dim it for anyone. Thank you for listening to my story. If it inspired you, please subscribe to the channel and tell me in the comments where you're watching from. I love hearing your stories and connecting with you.